Hey, everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Integrated Man Project podcast. Before we jump into this week's episode, I did want to share about an exclusive membership I'm going to be launching to help shape the Integrated Man Project community. If this is something you'd be interested in, where you will be co-laboring with me, sharing your ideas, giving input, giving me feedback, part of kind of this process of creating something bigger and better for all men, I would love for you to join. And if this is something you're interested, please reach out to me. Email me at integratedmanproject@gmail.com. You could also send me a direct message on Instagram as well, or on LinkedIn. I would love for you to reach out to me. I would love for you to be part of this exclusive group to help, again, shape and form this Integrated Man community. Because as you do this, as we share in this journey together, we're going to create a community of men around the world where we become more grounded, more adaptable, more resilient, and more authentic men. So come on and join. If you're interested in this, please reach out to me. And without further ado, let's get into this week's episode. Well, welcome everybody to this week's episode of the podcast. This guest is special to me only because, well, not only because, a lot of reasons why. We've had a lot of amazing conversations. We met. You'll have to help me out here, Sam. So everyone, Sam, welcome to the show. But I don't know how long it's been we've been talking, but via voice, audio, text, FaceTime. We've done so much for a long time, and finally have you on the show. And we've been trying to have a conversation for, how long has it been? I don't even know anymore.
3 years.
Travis. Has it been that long?
It's been 3 years.
Oh my God.
It's funny because I actually think my wife, Chrissy Powers, found you and was like, you got to check out this guy's work. And then, so we started doing the whole Instagram DM and all that stuff. And we have a lot of commonalities, a lot of similar acquaintances in those fields and stuff like that. And, we've been trying to do this, and I think it's a perfect time. Actually, I think that, I've been a big fan of the show, the quality of conversations that you're putting out into the world for us guys, us dads, in any capacity, have been really beautiful, because I think what we men are craving now, especially as dads, is we are taking what we were given as kids, in taking that and going, hey, did this work for me? Did this work for us? Did this work for our family? And we are trying to constantly improve now to give our kids maybe the attunement and the attachment and the parenting that maybe we didn't get.
Yeah.
And that's something that a lot of the episodes, and it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful experience, because this is a different space than a lot of us have experienced.
Well, Sam, thank you for the kind words. It means a lot, and I appreciate that. Yeah, it's good to know that it's having that impact on people. That's been my intention, is to have real conversation and to have that space. So it's cool to hear that it, what people experience. But crazy that's been 3 years. That was before my daughter was born. And yes. I know that it was through your wife, Chrissy. I'm going to say hi again. Hi, Chrissy. Hi. That we met. And yeah, we've had some amazing conversations, just kind of on and off. It's 3 years. It's like where I blinked. I feel like I blinked. And then I had another kid, and I felt like it really blinked. So I guess the more kids you have, time just speeds up, dude. So
for me, I'm 45. I grew up in San Diego. I am a personal development coach. I am a custom home builder. So I build homes. That's been my chosen skill set for the last 20 plus years. I've been married for almost 14 years to my wife, who is also a mental health professional. So, I've been around a lot of the work that we've all done. I've got 3 kids, 11, 8, and 5. And yes, when you have 3 children, it just becomes warp speed, and they hit. And I think it's funny, is like those early years when they're not as mobile and they're not as verbal, those years seem like they drag on forever. And then they hit this point, and then you're just going. You're just flying through those months and then it's like, oh my gosh, summer's here. Like, what are we going to do? Like, and then it's
Yeah.
like winter break, and then it's like spring, summer, and you're like, what just happened?
I definitely feel it.
Oh yeah.
I
Oh,
relate.
dude.
Yeah.
And I thought it was challenging with 2 kids, but once you hit that 3 mark, there is and I don't mean this in a bad way, but there's literally a level of detachment where you're like, all this other stuff just doesn't matter, and we're just sending it into the future.
Hmm.
We're going fast.
Yeah. Oh, totally. No, yeah, I feel it. As you said that too with the 3, when you have one, and it's all, I'm gonna say this too, people, it's all relative. Like there's definitely some
Oh yeah.
relativeness to this, but when you have one, if they're having like a difficult time or emotions, or they're having they're trying to navigate it, you have all the attention on one kid.
Oh
And that,
gosh.
by the way, first time around, that could definitely be a lot of work, and that could be taxing as a parent, and trying to deal with your kid's emotions and what does this mean and learning it. But then you have 2, and then you go to 3 when you're alone with all 3 and they're all having a hard time. It's like, okay, so which one am I going to have to totally neglect right now? Because I can't be 3 people to all 3 of you right now. And I think
And
that's
it's
survival mode.
it is, and it's so hard because you and especially for dads that are doing the
Mm,
work. And it's funny because like I told someone recently, I said, you know what the hardest thing about being a parent now is when you're a parent like us who are actively trying to improve not only the quality of your life internally,
yeah.
you're not only having to parent or reparent yourself if you're doing any kind of healing, but then you're parenting your children at the same time, and you're just, part of me is like going, I hope I'm doing this right. Like I'm like, seriously, I'm trying really hard to do this right, and I'm really trying to do this the best that I can. It's terrifying sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean,
Yeah.
and I always go back to like, good parents worry that they're going to be good parents.
Hmm.
Other parents, they're not worrying about that. I'm like, okay, I think I'm on the right path.
We're on the right path. Well, and I feel it sometimes. I'm like, as a clinician, and I'm like, I know these things. Like I teach these things, and I still get stuck in these things, and that's okay.
Oh, well,
All the grace in the world.
and you know what? I think that's something that I resonated a lot with a lot of the conversations you've had with other men, is that being married to a clinician myself,
Hmm.
we understand, like, as the partner of a clinician, it's like, I get where you have to be. I really get it. But it's also so great to know that your clinician partner still will break down and like lose it and be like,
Oh yeah.
I'm
Hmm.
overserved. I'm over resourced. I don't have any capacity left. And it's like, it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm very thankful for my spouse, my wife, who's very understanding, and knows that, does not hold me to some weird pedestal, but totally gets that I'm human. In fact, the other night, I'm having a conversation she was going into the deep, it was like a big conversation about what will we do in this situation. And it was like at the end of the day, it was a Friday night.
Oh, dude,
We're
Friday
driving
night's the
home.
worst.
Yeah. And I'm like, and then she goes in this deep conversation, which I totally need to have and would love to have. But I just was like, right now, while there's a part of me that totally wants to totally jump into this, the other part of me can't actually have a really good, I can't really engage in this because I have nothing to give in this. And this conversation is not like, hey, do you want to cook at home or pick up drive through? It wasn't
Yeah.
that kind of conversation. It was
No,
like a
it
very
was
like big decision. What would you
cognitive,
do?
a very cognitive, decisive.
Emotional. Yeah. Yeah. It was a
So
lot. And I said, right now, tonight, I'm unable to, but we need to have this conversation. But right now, I won't be able to give all of myself. And she totally got it. I was like, thank you. Like that's,
so
I love it.
so I learned this. We have a relationship coach that has
Hmm.
really helped us. Our coach told us one time, because when you have small kids, your time is going out to everyone else but your spouse. Normal.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you kind of grieve the loss of that, especially if you're a partner, and as for moms, their kids, they have a different attachment because they grew those children, which is a
Oh,
beautiful
totally.
gift. And so our relationship coach, she told us, she goes, well, this discourse, she
Mm.
goes, you can always just say to your partner, like, I don't have the resources to have this conversation. And so it was a really beautiful way to get that framed,
Mm.
and go, yeah, I don't have the resources. I don't have the emotional bandwidth.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and so now, there's been times my wife's favorite time to bring up these conflicts or like conversations is right as I'm trying to fall asleep. And I'm like, honey, I love you so much. I said, but this tab needs to close on the computer and I don't have the resources to have this
Mm.
conversation right
Yeah.
now.
Mm.
And, the person that you're talking to is not the same person that had that bandwidth or even that emotional intelligence like over 3-4 years ago.
Mm.
And so I'm kind of like living proof that change is possible when it's intentional and when your partnership is based off of the ability to change and empathy and vulnerability. Because
Mm.
before we crossed paths, I was a very dense. I thought I had made it as a human
Mm.
being. I was good. I was totally fine. I had the answers. I had all the boxes checked off. And then 2020 happened.
Mm. Oh yeah.
And I'll give you the little backstories because that can bring us up to now. And so as a custom builder of homes, when my wife and I got married, when she was pregnant with our first kid, we got the opportunity to buy a piece of property near my parents and build a house. And our goal was always to build what they call an ADU, which is an accessory dwelling unit. And building in California, even though I do this all the time, it's such a different challenge when you're doing it for yourself. And
Mm.
so my wife was pregnant with our first son, who's now 11. We bought the property in 2011. Built the first house. It took almost 3 years. We
Mm.
finished it in 2014. Our first son was an extreme colic kid. So we lived in a 600 square foot, 1-bedroom condo from where we were building the house. But building a house takes an incredible amount of planning and resources. And so we built that house. We lived there. We had 2 more kids. And the goal was always to build a secondary, bigger house,
Mm-hmm.
because I built a fairly small house, 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, which sounds big for a lot of people. But when you have children, as you know, that space starts to feel very, very constricted. And so
Mm-hmm.
I drew the plans myself. I got them through the city. My wife she got pregnant with our daughter. And so I was doing all that, logistics stuff, getting it ready. We had our daughter Ruby and got our main house approved by the jurisdiction we live in, it took like almost a year and a half.
Mm.
So it's like, I
Yeah.
tell people it's like submitting a plan for a Lego kit to the DMV. That's what it's like trying to get a house built. And there was nothing there. So it's like, you're dealing with a lot of
Yeah.
logistics and minutia. And so we pulled our first permit on 9/9/19. I will never forget it because I was like, wow, this is so wild. It's like 9/9/19. I was like, I'll never forget this day. Started building it, took a big construction loan, got the house rough constructed, got it framed, got the windows in, and then March of 2020 shows up.
Mm.
And and I was so focused on what I was doing
Sure.
because it's like I grew up in an evangelical space too, and so when you're given those messages from early on, it's like you're the provider, you're the protector, you're going to do this. And I just remember like watching the whole world close down slowly,
Mm.
and then it was like, okay, now you're done, you're stopped.
Mm.
And I'm literally, we're living in our guest house, and I'm looking out the window of this dream project, my part of my
Mm.
legacy, whatever you want to call it. And
Mm-hmm.
it was one of the most defeating experiences of my life.
Mm.
And I come from a good, my dad was one of 5 kids. My mom was one of 4 kids. My dad's family is a good Irish Catholic family. And during the pandemic, I got depressed. I started abusing
Hmm.
alcohol. Classic.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I was the only one.
Hmm.
And the amount of stress, I mean, I became like the homeschool parent. And, it's like I got a second to third grader and I got a kindergartner and a 2-year-old. And I can honestly say that my wife, she went back to work as a therapist because
Hmm.
as you remember that time period, I mean, still,
Yeah.
she had kind of paused her private practice when we had our second son. And she was like, well, what are we going to do? And I was like, I have no idea. I was like, our construction loan got froze because it was a national disaster. So it was
Hmm.
just like, for me, and I'm like a planner. So it's like, I'm like, okay, I got this, do all this stuff.
Yeah.
It just was the most overwhelming and sad. It was the
Hmm.
most hopeless I'd felt in so long.
Hmm.
And so I'm even saying this out loud, like there's still that residual shame of like that I wasn't strong enough,
Ah.
because that's, for us guys, it's like we're taught from day one, like be strong, you got to be noble, you got to protect your family. And I literally I just couldn't hold it together anymore. And
Hmm.
I would I would abuse alcohol, so I'd kind of like binge. And
Hmm.
then finally one night it I just allowed myself to just go that distance.
Hmm.
And it was one of the saddest nights of my life, like I can remember, because I remember being in that, even in my totally just sorry state of a human. I just knew, I was like, I can't go any farther. And that was like
Hmm.
in June of 2020. And I woke up the next day just feeling the most defeated I think I'd ever felt.
Hmm.
I just there's a hopelessness that I had never really experienced, and that was like one of the most hopeless days. Like I just was like, I felt so worthless. I felt so sad. And
Hmm.
I don't remember my wife, and I give her all the
Hmm.
props in the world and all the respect, because she just was like, honey, I love you. Get help that you need. I don't know how we're gonna kind of move forward.
Yeah. Sobering conversation.
Oh, it's just, and as a mental health
Yeah.
professional, she's a mental health professional.
Yeah.
And I almost felt more sad that, and like it was almost like this, like my ego just went, I'm done. It's like,
Hmm.
dude, you're married to a mental health professional. You can't even
Yeah.
keep your life together.
We'll talk about the shame on top of shame, right? You're already having
Oh,
shame
dude.
and then another layer of shame on top of that, Yeah.
And it took me a while to kind of unravel all of this and put it in words, because when something like that happens, and I look back and I'm very grateful that I I didn't physically hurt anyone,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I mean, I am so, and this sounds so weird, I am so blessed that experience happened the way it did in the place it did,
Hmm.
because the hurt though that I caused was trust, trust, trust. And I mean, just
Yeah.
all of that. I mean, that emotional damage of like not being that safe person for my
Yeah.
partner, and then also my
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And that was so hard. And that was such, and when I tell people, it's like, they're like, well, was that your rock bottom? I was like, oh, rock bottom. I was lucky that my rock bottom high,
Yeah. Huh.
because I have friends that have their rock bottoms was way lower than mine. And I really think if I hadn't had been in therapy and done therapy before, like I had that awareness.
Mm.
And so it was beautiful, because my wife with so much grace was like, well, you need help.
Mm.
Therapy is not helping you right now. Do you want to go to rehab? And we had a close friend of ours who had gone to on-site workshops, which is in Tennessee, in Cumberland Furnace, and it's a wellness intensive workshop. They do experiential therapy. It was originally founded on helping people with codependency. They have a location actually in San Diego, Ramona, called the Oaks. And my friend was like, hey man, like he went, I don't know, maybe a year before and he was like, you should go. Like this would be
Mm.
the place to go. I just happened to like my wife's like, you got to call him. She goes, I'm not going to
Yeah.
do this work for you. She goes, you got to do this call. And I was like, she's like, would you rather go to rehab or would you rather go to on-site? And I was like, oh, I'll go to on-site.
Hmm.
I mean, I had a lot of friends go to rehab over the years.
Mhm.
It never worked. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, I had a good friend who went 3 times and I'm like, even then I'm like, something's not, there's something else. And for some people, it is the gift that is healing because everyone's healing journey looks different. So I went to the second session after they reopened for the pandemic. It's like 6 days, no phones. You don't talk about what you do. You don't talk about your last name. I mean, or even really where you live. So it's this like leveling of humanity. And
Mm.
you do experiential therapy, psychodrama. And I can honestly say it was one of the hardest, yet one of the top 10 things I've ever done in my life. I mean, besides marrying my wife, having my kids,
Yeah.
I can honestly say going there was like it was what my soul needed to reconnect to who I was.
Mm. What your soul
Uh,
needed to reconnect to who you were. That's powerful.
you know, it's something that now I realize too, and this is where as we move forward in this conversation, it makes more sense because I remember coming home and that was very hard because
Mm.
you know, you don't have your phone for 6 days. You're with these people, you like almost trauma bond, but it's part of that group, being in those groups and being in those small rooms where you're holding space for your team, your
Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
You get this profound sense of like of empathy and you learn that
Mm.
vulnerability, that emotional intelligence that I just never had.
Yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah.
like you never, like you're not taught that. I mean, hate to say it, I'm 45. I'm like the tail end of Gen X. Like I remember before the internet, you know, it's like before cell phones, like pagers, you know, it's like, but I'm young enough to like remember like, you know, like MySpace and all that stuff where I'm like, what's streaming? You know, it's like I remember when iTunes was new and I'm like,
Uh-huh.
wow, I
Yeah.
can just download like the entire like catalog of my favorite. I'm like, you know, so it's weird occupying certain spaces. And I grew up in an evangelical system, and you know, even with that, you know, there still is this performative pressure. And you know, I grew up in purity culture. For any of your listeners, like I remember the true
Mm.
love weights. I remember all that stuff, you know. And so when you grow up in these systems, you know, gives you a false sense of that you're good.
Mm.
You're done, you know, like it's like
Yeah.
check the box, you do the work,
You're
it's
good.
all
Yeah.
systems good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was interesting because I remember coming home from on site and I honestly was like I was like almost scared to be home because then I had
Mm.
this, like I was just seeing the world through all this new things. I mean, my house wasn't done. The house we were building wasn't done. And I think what happened is, so I stayed home. I took care of the kids. I finished the house. Like, I don't know. I mean, it was like pulling teeth, but with the tools that I learned, it just gave me a new sense of gratitude for just being. And that's what you know, and I learned I had all these codependent tendencies. So I had to dive in doing, you know, codependent work and unraveling all of that because, and this is what's really hard. And I don't think that most people know. People think codependent, they think of this like person that can't get themselves off the floor or can't, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of misaligned stereotypes.
Sure. Oh yeah.
I'm so grateful I read Melody Betty's Codependent No More. I mean, it's like the Bible of codependence, and On-Site was founded on that. So I did their living centered track, and I remember like someone was like, "Well, what's it like?" And they're like, "Codependent," and I was like, "Yeah." They're like,
Mm.
"What's that?" And I'm like, I said, "Well, think of it this way: I easily could stop drinking because you can cut a substance or behavior out of your life, but you can't quit people."
Mm.
And that's
Mm.
hard.
Yeah.
And so what I had to do is like learn about intentionality of like, was I saying yes to a friend because it would affirm me? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard. And that's a multi-layered, very nuanced expression of behavior and moving
Yeah.
forward in an operating system. And it's so funny because I remember I told that to a friend of mine right when I got back from on site. And I mean, they were just like puzzled face ever. And they're
Huh.
just like, you're codependent. And I was like, yeah, that's that was like the real issue
Mm.
is that when the affirmation I was seeking for
Mm.
didn't get met, I would get stressed. I would start to spiral, and then I would cope. And you cope with the poisons that feel like home.
Yeah.
And it's been the last 3 years have been some of the hardest years, yet some of the most rewarding experiences of my life.
Mm.
And it's funny because it took me way longer to finish our house. I mean, we didn't have any money to finish it. We figured out how to do it. I mean, it was like me and my dad, who's a general contractor as well, and we just did the best we could. I mean, the amount of stuff that I had to do by myself, it was almost comical from a
Mm.
professional standpoint.
Yeah.
But I was like, you know what? I'm so grateful that I'm here. And
Yeah.
I'd get to see my kids. And
Mm.
I think that was one of the most profound thing was if that had not happened, I would have
Mm.
never gotten to reconnect and learn how to attune to be the parent
Mm.
that I hoped I would have been.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's so hard because as hard as all that was, I would never take it back because of, and our therapist at Onsite, I remember standing there talking to her, Kathy, she was just wonderful. And I felt so much shame for my behavior before
Mm.
Onsite with my kids because
Yeah.
they'd seen me inebriated more than any kid should see their parent, and it's
Mm.
a sad thing. I remember crying and I just said, well, how do I do this, when I go home with my
Yeah.
kids? And she was like, well, your kids are young and that's important. She goes, so you're just going to be the dad you want to be, and they're
Mm.
slowly going to forget the dad that was.
Yeah.
And honestly, that was one of the greatest gifts to me. And she was like, it's going to be okay. And so we did that. I mean, my wife, if she hadn't gone back to work, we would have been sunk, I give her all the props for that because we couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
So we finished the house. Everyone went kind of back to normal, and we crossed paths, started, listening to all the work that you were doing, just like in awe of all the wisdom that you were bringing to us dads, because really it's a space that we didn't have. And it's
Mm.
funny and I'm still building houses and I'm still doing that, but it's funny. I crossed paths with Mike Foster. So Mike
Mm-hmm.
Foster is my personal development coaching mentor. Mike was the one who told my friend about Onsite.
Mm.
My friend went to Onsite and my friend told me to go Onsite. And now Mike Foster is my mentor in personal development. So
Yeah. Crazy small world, right?
it's
How
a
things
crazy
connect.
small world. And it's funny because like when I started to do all that work, I'm naturally a storyteller and I'm a people, I was a people pleaser for a long time. And it's funny because when I learned I had codependent tendencies, I changed that, intentionality. And so I got the opportunity this last year to join Mike Foster's Primal Questions like coaching cohort. And that's why we're here. And
That's why we're here.
and it's funny because like my wife's like, you would make a great therapist. And I was like, I don't know. And I was was really into punk rock when I was in my like late teens, 20s. So I naturally have this, I don't know, like I'm just a punk rocker. Like I grew up in punk. Like I loved it. I loved the messaging of like, we're going to stick it to the man, all that stuff. And it was funny when I found this work, I was like, so I could do coaching. And I was like, I wonder what the difference is. And I started looking up the difference and I was like, oh, coaching, I could just be like, get a little more radical. And, some people need that because I needed that. I fully needed
Totally.
that. And
And you're not bound by a bunch of laws like we are.
Yeah.
You get a little more freedom. I mean, you're bound by laws, but I mean, it's a little less restrictive
Oh,
than us. Yeah.
yeah. And honestly, like I take it very seriously
Yeah. I know
because,
you do.
my
Yeah.
partner is by the book and two working with, and I primarily work with men right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really funny because like I look at some of my clients that I work with and I'm like, oh, that was me like 10 years ago. And this is so cool that
Yeah.
they're gonna benefit for all my failures, all my screw ups. And I can
Mm-hmm.
tell them like, hey man, like, and I've even told some clients, I was like, if you're not like stoked, like let me know. I won't be offended because if you got to break up with me and you find someone else that helps you launch, I'm like, that's that's the work right there.
Yeah. No, good for you. No, that's a sign of a mature coach slash clinician, right? I say the same thing. Hey, you got to make sure we jive. If we don't, it's gonna be hard to get you anywhere. You got to make sure that you like me enough to trust me enough to go there.
Oh
Otherwise,
yeah.
I want you to find someone else. Tell me. Same thing. I don't take offense because then that means I don't want to be a hindrance to your journey of health.
Oh yeah. And for I think too, and this is something that I've seen your podcast and I see with the work you're doing. When men heal, everyone's quality of life becomes so much better.
Yes, 100%.
And it's so, and what I run into too, and this is something that you've worked with your clients, it's like a lot of the guys that I've worked with, 2, 3, 4 sessions, all I'm doing is just going, all right, man, what do you feel? Like, are you feeling safe? Are you feeling secure? Do you feel like loved? Like, what's going on? So we use feeling wheels, and it's funny because people are just like, well, how do you get guys to talk about their feelings? I was like, oh, that's the hardest work because it's something that we weren't taught. Like we weren't
Right.
taught this, as a
Right.
cultural narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the messaging was to not only not taught to not feel,
Oh God, yeah.
and to feel would be, weakness, all these other things. So the way it was that's a threat to feel. Feelings are threats. Feelings are not safe. Feelings are, the enemy, so to speak. So I'm not going to go anywhere near there. So to actually now come in and have that question, it's like
And
the
it's
defenses come out and, the dance begins. But it totally makes sense,
yeah, and so it's so funny because so the book is the 7 primal questions. It's
Yep, right
Mike
here.
Foster's. Yeah,
Boom. There it is.
it's awesome.
It's
The
probably
cool
backwards
thing,
in reverse.
yeah, I know. There, I'll hold
Man,
my
we both have
copy.
it. Hey, oh, we're book buddies.
I know
Look.
it's the best. So it's funny because
So what is this? What is the primal question? Can you what is a primal question? Like what? And
okay,
let's frame this. Why should guys care about this?
how do you feel? That's what it is. It's
Yeah.
about so and I think so. Mike, I'll give you some context. So he's been in the personal development space for like 20 years. So he knows his stuff. The primal question, he developed it after 6,000 hours of doing couples and individual work. And he noticed for clients, and you're a clinician, that certain things would always kind of come up, whether it's in conflict with with couples, where it's a behavior that repeats.
Mm-hmm.
It's a stuck emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And so he started to take note of all these. Now he's done an incredible amount of personal work himself, to bring him to this place so he can actually see this. And he started to develop this idea. Like he's like, well, I keep seeing these core wounds or these questions or these things that just continue to pop up in every session, over, 6,000 hours. That's a lot. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and so he kind of started narrowing down and then he would beta test it on, his clients and he'd be like, well, hey, let's ask this question. And so the 7 questions and it sounds, and I hate saying it sounds simplistic, but usually good information feels pretty simple.
Oh yeah, and as when you rattle off the 7 questions, because I recently picked up the book based upon your recommendation, and reading it to me, in both that personally, just as being a guy and everything in my own story, as well as being a therapist, is like most things are quite simple when it comes down to it, because most things go back to like what you needed as a kid, as a child. And when we're children, it is very straightforward. It's not complicated. So
And
that's why I think it makes sense.
and here's something to think about too. The most direct humans in the world are your children. They're like,
Yeah.
I want that. I want
Right.
that. Can I have that? I need
Yeah.
this. They just tell it to you. And it's so interesting because as you grow and I hate to say it's like we get this our own false sense of our own amazingness, which tends to be our ego, And I remember picking up the book before I even joined the coaching and all that. And I remember I got it in the mail and I was like, I'm like an avid reader. So I've read some pretty hefty, I've read, Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And I'm just a curious human. Like and it, I was grateful that I had parents that always fostered the idea of like, hey, if you're going to do something, learn the history of it too.
Yeah.
So that you have reverence for the past, so that you can bring it into the future. And then you can, and they weren't even like, so you can talk about with authority. It was just like, no, just know where the past comes from. Cause like I played music, did surf, skated, all that stuff. And my parents were always like, hey, listen, if you want to play like rock and roll, why don't you learn where it came from? And so, and I'm really grateful that they instilled that early on. And so like, I've always been and I'm a fast reader, which ticks people off because they're like, how did you read that so fast? I was like, I just have that ability.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I picked up the book, I was like, well, this is, it's really clean. It's really simple. I'm like, the font's bigger. And I was like, I'm like my own biasy of like, and I start digging in and I start doing the questions and then I'm doing the scrambles. And then all of a sudden I'm like burned through the book and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so genius. This is because it's something that even anyone can access this. And I think that's, and I'm married to a therapist. Some people just, they hear that word and they're like, I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. And I mean, I've heard it. I've seen it. I've been witness to the conversations where people are always like, you're married to a therapist. And I'm like, yes, I am. They're like, do they try and change you? And I was like, they can't. That's why I have my own therapist.
Yeah. It's very true. Yeah.
And so,
it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work. And so the 7 questions are, and I, when you say them out loud, like everyone can kind of relate. It's like,
oh, totally.
Am I safe? Am I secure? Am I loved? Am I wanted? Am I successful? Am I good enough? And this one, and it's interesting, a lot of my clients, do I have a purpose? Simple enough on paper, saying it out loud.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. So when you, like, I started diving into all that work and it's like, these are that soul question that you just, it always, and I think for men too, it resonates because it's something that, because we're not taught to be very relational or expressive with any other emotion than anger or frustration. Yeah. It's like, do I walk around going, am I safe? No, of course not.
Right.
But if that question from childhood shows up, the flip side of that question is like the gift. So we will, see, I'm a question one. I'm like, am I safe? I've suffered from anxiety for most of my life. It's biological. I now know that if I was born now, I would have been considered a highly sensitive person. Well, guess what? Anxiety and sensitivity goes together.
Yeah, they're hand in hand for sure.
Hand in hand. I didn't know. It's like born in 1978,
Yeah. And we're talking about that then, really.
No, I'm 12 years old in 1990. That was that emotional awareness. And so it's interesting because when I started to understand, like, am I safe? Like my core fear is like harm and not feeling safe. And so my gift is that when people enter into my world, I try and make them feel as safe as possible. And I will try to make sure that they're, if people, family stays at our house, like I'm going to make sure that they don't need anything. It's like, I'm going to meet their needs. And, the problem is that it also would paralyze me. Like I wouldn't know how to take risks because so for my question, now that I know that this is kind of who I was like, dang,
Makes
I
sense. All the
I didn't
dots and
take,
stars are aligning.
yeah. And you're just like
Yeah.
going, I'm like, okay, like, and what it is when you do these questions in this work, it's like, for me now, it's like my primal like truth statement is I am safe. And just
Mm,
flipping that and
yeah.
tipping it from am I safe to I am safe.
Mm-hmm.
And and I even go like I joined, I joined the beta group of Primal Questions coaches. I
Yeah.
made a financial investment, and now knowing it's like that was a huge risk for me, and I took that risk out of my question going. And I remember like even having the conversation with my wife before I signed up to do it, and she was like, "Honey, this is like a no brainer. This is what you're good at. You're good at connecting with people." She goes,
Mm,
you won't stop building. And I was like, no, because I'm good at that too. She goes, you can always add this on,
yeah.
for maybe one day that your body's just like, hey man, like can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because like I remember getting my first client, and I just remember getting off the first call, and I was like, oh my gosh, that was to see someone connect with themselves, as
Yeah.
it's such a joy,
Oh, totally. Absolutely.
you
It's the best
know,
feeling. Yeah.
and it's and I don't ever regret, my past and the way I operated, because that former version kept me safe till now.
Yeah.
And now I know I am safe,
Yeah.
and I can live in that primal truth, and I can take more risks, and I can, grow and, instill that value in my kids,
Yeah.
and
Well,
it's funny because we do couples like that, and my wife uses it for couples like work a lot too.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and in the book too, it talks about, which I think, what you tell me if this fits, but because we have this question, I like, even like the title's catchy. It caught my eye when, the primal
Yeah.
questions, and
Yeah.
then when I read it, I'm like, oh, I think the word primal makes total sense because it is that kind of core deep question that we're all asking. And they're all kind of getting to the same thing, just a different way of saying it. And so, every person that I sit with in my office when I'm doing therapy, and I've seen like well over 1,000 people. I mean, I can't even count anymore.
Yeah.
It's been 10 years of doing it. So, give or take 30 people a week for the past 10 years, whatever the hell that number is. Big number.
That's a lot.
Yeah, big number. So, and you see like everyone at the core, they're asking questions like this. And so it is probably because it's the kind of what everything was back down to. And then when you think of your life, and I think just to help the listeners get a better sense is that we have this question, and I think how the book frames it is if we can't say that, in case for you, that I am safe. It's if the question is, am I safe? We tend to say I'm not, or I don't know, which then leads us into what Mike Foster called the scramble, right?
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh
the
man.
scramble or the primal avoidance, right? Which is kind of avoiding.
Yep.
So, if could you quickly give like what that, you kind of shared it a little bit before, I think, but to put it in that frame light of like when you would get stuck in your kind of scramble or primal avoidance, when you couldn't answer the question, am I safe, with a yes, what were some of the behaviors or things you would do to kind of deal, quote unquote, with that kind of dissonance with, am I actually
Oh
safe? I don't think I am, because I think the answer is I'm not safe right now. So what
yeah.
would you do?
Oh, I think like, well, it's interesting because like the first two questions, like, am I safe and am I secure? They're very close,
Yeah.
and what it is like for me, part of safety is like a financial piece too,
Hmm.
because I grew up in a working class family, which is great, you know, but I knew, as the oldest kid and as being a sensitive kid, guess what? I would know when things were a little lean. And so like when
Yeah.
my safe question like was starting to, get triggered, like I wouldn't take any risks. I'd start
Hmm.
working a ton. I would start, I would like hoard resources,
Hmm.
and so like, and I would try to like, I would get really rigid, making sure that everything kind of was put in like a lockbox and like, or put in my safe and be like, okay, now I've got all this taken care of and I've got it all
Mm-hmm.
planned, but then it wouldn't allow me to move forward or enjoy what I
Mm.
had or be present because I'd be like in the future, and so
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff is, and I think that everyone has that. Everyone has their own, like thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, for like the am I secure, it's like that part would kind of bleed over. And so I just work a ton and I would
Yeah, almost
just,
like to create security and like you're almost trying to like take control by seizing control, but it's
yes.
riddled with anxiety and worry and stress. It's not grounded in like kind of a calm peace.
And it's,
It's stress fueled, right? Anxiety fueled, right?
and it's coming of from a place of deep lack, and we all know those people, and it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting because like, you know, you've got the questions, am I loved? It's like we all know someone, or we've all known several people that, for them, their big idea is like love is oxygen. They need love to
Yeah.
breathe, to move through the world, and without it, they just can't even move forward, or they feel like they're going
Yeah.
to die,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because for like the am I loved, it's like when they're healthy and they're in that their primal truth that I am loved, they're nurturing, they're kind, they're empathetic, they're loving, and when they are not there, it's just, they isolate, they, hide, they do all that
Oh yeah.
like emotional gaslighting. It's like they
Mm-hmm.
self-sabotage,
Oh
and
yeah.
so it's like each one has this give and take. And, with for me as like one of the primal questions coaches, a huge part of what I do now, especially, I've got a bunch of guys that are all like, what's my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose question is so interesting because it's, the big idea is like, you know, to kind of free yourself from figuring everything out. And I think guys are like, so, I mean, that's what we're told. You got to figure it out. You got to do it. You got to learn it. You got to do everything, and it's funny because like their kryptonite, like for people that don't have that question, they're big, the total kryptonite or the scramble is like pointless work. So like
Yeah.
just the mundane,
That's me. That's
just
me with the six. I'm a blend of the six and the seven. The good enough
the
and the
good
purpose.
enough. Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting because, for like the good enough, which is also part of your purpose, because,
Yeah.
your kryptonite is criticism.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. That was
I,
mine for
I
a long time. Mm-hmm.
it's so funny because my kryptonite is negative surprises. So when something comes out of the blue, I'm just like, oh shoot.
Yeah.
Oh crap. Like, what are we gonna do? And
Yeah.
it drives my partner crazy because she's like,
Yeah.
honey, come on, we're gonna get
Yeah.
this together. We're doing this together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so funny because I was on a call with a client and he's a seven. So, and he was
Mm-hmm.
talking about what he was doing. And I said, hey man, like I know this, sometimes it's hard to, get this stuff kind of reflected back. And I said, your gift is that you see like projects and movements that make life better for everyone else. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you're doing is you're literally with your podcast, you are creating movements. It's a project
Mm-hmm.
and you're bringing wisdom into the world to improve all of us. I mean,
Yeah.
that is your gift. Like
Yeah.
that's insane, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And for a long time, it wasn't there. When I was
No.
younger, I was stuck in the scramble, the
Yeah.
avoidance.
Yeah.
I was trying to prove my worth and enough by doing things and getting achievements and degrees and these things. And then purpose, feeling aimless. What do I do? I don't know, but I knew. And then I started doing my own work in therapy and a lot of reading. And then I had some mentors in my life that really helped me along the way. And then I started to like not live in my, back then I didn't have the word scramble. I called it shame and different things.
Yeah.
But the lie but yeah, in the scramble, I would avoid and I wouldn't see it. And because there's a lot of fear there, a lot of fear, and
Oh
so
yeah.
how do we deal with that fear? Well, I do things to kind of keep it pushed down and not have to face it, and don't let anyone really see you. But doing the work, I realize that doesn't, of course, that does nothing other than make it worse. And so it's all about connection and vulnerability. And so seeing this, and I appreciate your kind words of the gift, and I'm like, I think that's my thinking through this lens is, you're right. My podcast and what I do is I really want to help people. And that gives me a sense of purpose and identity, knowing that I'm able to give these things away to people who may not step into a therapy office, who may not be ready, but maybe I can give some things away by sharing stories. And that gets me excited and have conversations all the time. Like, I love doing it. It's not taxing. I don't have to prove myself. I just show up and I love it. Um,
Yeah.
you know?
And it's funny because as a coach too, for me, when I sit with these any guys, it's
Hmm.
like I'm like, hey man, like I just want you to know you're safe to be here, and it's okay. It's okay to not be okay because
Mm,
we're all a little not okay sometimes. When we're in those seasons or we're in those challenges. I mean, 2020, 2021, my whole journey of just like learning how to show up to my life in a way that I didn't know was possible, you know?
mm,
And, it's funny because like I tell people like I've got a therapy appointment on Friday afternoon and I was like, hey, I'm going to leave early, from our site. And I'm like, I'm going to leave and I'm going to therapy. And I used to just go, oh, I got an appointment,
uh,
like I
yeah,
just, because, it was like, I
yeah,
didn't, and now I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm going to therapy. I got to tune up. I got to show up. I just want to be the best,
yeah,
and it's funny because, and we live in this culture too, where it's like, oh, well, you need to do the work. It's like, I hear that. And I'm like, which work do you want to do?
yeah,
Because, for us, self-care it's now just something that we can also consume.
yeah,
But, when we are learning, you know, how to show up to be a better version of ourselves,
right.
you can only buy so many products
Oh yeah,
before you're like,
totally.
oh man,
Hmm.
I'm not I'm not here.
Yeah, you can only get your nails done so many times
Yeah.
before, um, you know. And so when you think about this, Sam, from all the work you've done, I'm wondering, and I think one of the biggest questions I get asked, and I'd be curious to hear your answer to this, because I think it's such an important question. And even when we think of like these 7 primal questions, and by the way, I think it's a great book, and I think a lot of men might resonate with it. Just kind of getting to it, because it's very, I don't know, it just kind of it gets straight to it. It's just, there's not a lot of fluff. It's just like, here you
And
go. Um,
you
but
and I know men like
oh yeah,
they
no,
don't
they don't
need
want.
fluff.
They just want to just, what do I need to do? And but that's what I appreciate the book. It's like, it's just, here's the framework. Here's what you need to know. It's not long over explaining. It's just boom.
Yeah.
And I like how even the layout, like the font, you're right. I love the font. It's great. It's just like, thank you. I like it. I read thick books too. I read really thick books,
Oh yeah.
like massive books, but I'm like, this is great. And because I'd recommend
Yeah.
this to a lot of guys that I'd see, I'm like, dude, read this book. In fact, I just recommended it like to 2 people today. Um, but I'm wondering, from your own story, and then also, because again, this question I get asked probably more than anything else in my DMs is, how do I help my husband, my partner, my dad, my brother to get help when they don't, like, what do I do? And
Dude.
I'm curious your response to that, because that's the one that is hands down the biggest, most often asked question I get. Um, and I ask people this question. I try to give my own responses, but I'd love to hear you going,
This is
recently going through your story and your journey. What would you say?
I mean, this is I get this asked all the time too. And this is what's really hard, and it's sometimes I just say, I really don't know. I
Mm,
really don't know what I think, and this is something that I tell people. I said, well, the best way, or when a guy wants to get help, is when they stop being a human, stop doing. And usually, for me, and I can tell you, like, we in our culture, men, we act like machines. And machines break down without maintenance. And so I
Mm,
always just tell people, like, and I work in a very masculine, world, and I've worked with a lot of pretty interesting characters, to say the
yeah,
least.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
And what I always just tell people is, like, a man will break down when he can't carry his old self anymore. And that can come from a divorce, it can come from a loss, it can come from a medical diagnosis, it can come from something where our humanity shows up in the mirror. And it's hard, because for the partners out there that are just like, give me the answer.
Oh, I know.
And it's so hard, because
Yeah.
I I think and this is something that I've learned, and you cannot force a partner cannot force a man to change, because it just won't happen.
Hmm.
But when a partner is not critical of a man, especially in his hard times, I think that vulnerability that a woman can offer, or any partner, and I
Yeah.
don't want to say like it's a gender specific,
Sure.
partner, but sometimes the nurturing partner in a relationship dynamic, if they, even with the level of hurt that, like, that partner that hasn't gotten help, if they can still extend vulnerability, empathy,
Yeah.
and love,
Right.
I really think that's where men can go, there is a different way.
Mm.
And this is, and I could be wrong, but I think there are a lot of men and a lot of partners that have tried to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
and maybe their vulnerability was not received, and
Hmm.
they retreat.
Yeah. And then that becomes never again. Never again. I tried, and I
That
have heard
that
that
didn't
too.
work.
I've heard that from other men too a lot, that like I have tried and it didn't land. And it's like, it was already a big risk for them to try. Whether it was perception or actual reality, I don't know, because I wasn't there, but I do trust a bit that they made an attempt, and then, I'm not going to, and so they retreat farther back in their cave.
Oh yeah.
And then
And
it's like, trauma wound all over again, right? Relational wound over again, mom wound, dad, whatever the wound is, dad wound, mom wound, all over again. And then it's like, nope, not gonna go there.
I think, and it's interesting, me being married to a therapist, and she does really incredible work with women,
Mm-hmm.
and she's always like, hey, the husband's like not on board, and I said, yeah, let's call him. And I always tell people, like, the greatest gift, so if you've got a partner that isn't changing, the greatest gift you can give to that partner is you do the work yourself, change, grow,
Yeah.
and learn to love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because when one partner changes, for not for the other partner, when that
Yeah.
person just goes, honey, and I've heard it from women, and they're just like, my husband won't do this. I said, you do the work for you, change, do you become the person you want to be. And when you get happier and you get healthier, and the quality of your life, the person that's not doing that work is there's going to come this point where it's like they're way up here, and they're going to go, um, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. And,
and
that's a challenge, by the way, for that person to do that, because it's kind of a lone thing for a while and you're fighting against it. But I agree with you. I think if you do that work, it eventually will force them to see it. Now, I don't know the outcome of what will happen in that, but eventually is going to come a point where that gap is going to get pretty far, and that person who gets healthier is going to start to respond differently to
oh yeah,
that guy. And that might eventually start to kind of make them think, and then eventually there'll be some type of tipping point. There always is.
and
But it is a lot of work, though, I would say, because
it
in a way you're doing it on your own, and it could feel isolating.
oh
Um,
yeah.
because you're trying to, like, you care for your partner, and it's like, but also there's some wounding there, and what do I do? Um,
Interesting. I have this. It's not a theory, but my wife. she started her healing journey before me. And I think it's interesting. It's like, I hear this all the time. You probably do too. And I was very confused in my naivety when my wife started to heal some of her childhood stuff and some of the stuff that the pre-existing operating system, that we,
Yeah.
and we both grew up in evangelical spaces. So we brought our expectations, our idealized roles and what that was supposed to look like
Uh-huh.
into our marriage. And we tried really hard to do those things right. And that nearly killed us. It's
Mm.
like what I tell people is like, yeah, like there's this beautiful movement of women really doing this work. And I said, well, why women do this work is they've been oppressed for so long culturally.
Mm-hmm.
And because they have the ability to reproduce, they naturally heal because they have this ability.
Yeah.
And I was like, and someone was like, doesn't make any sense. I said, think about it. I said, you think about the world at large who nurtures from day one. It's women. They nurture us. You and I would not be here without a mom. There's
No,
no
no, you're right.
there's no motherless son, because that's
Yeah.
how we're all here. And when I said that out loud to someone, and they gave me so much grief, but I was like, no, that's the truth. They naturally nurture because they reproduce, they
Mm-hmm.
love, and they know because of their biology, they experience that regeneration. We men don't. And so we get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And I told this, my friend, and they were just like, they were kind of scratching their head. And I was like, listen, I've got a daughter. I've got sons. I watch the way naturally my daughter cares for something. It's just this innate nurture. So of course she's going to heal. But I want to teach my boys, it's okay to heal, love, and grow just because you are human. And that is like
Mm-hmm.
your right.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, and I see that my kids too. My daughter, my son. My second son is he cares, but it's more of like a service type of care,
Yeah.
and he'll help and do things. Like now, I didn't teach him it, not at all. He just does it. My daughter has this like more of like the comfort, like
Oh,
cuddle and hold things. Again, not teaching her how to. I didn't say okay. I didn't teach them any different. I show up the same with my kids. But do you see this the innateness in it, and you're like,
yeah.
yeah, my boys never did that. And not that I even tried giving them that, and it didn't play out that way. Like they weren't into holding stuffed animals,
No.
It was like, give me the truck, let me bang it on something. But my middle son is like, let me help out by doing a service and act like, oh, he'll help and take things out. And he's like, he wants to like do something, give me a job, right? But my daughter has
Yeah.
this like, in fact, my wife showed me a video today, made this little setting with a little doll, and like, I'm gonna give the food and then holding and rocking the kid. My boys never did that, and I would hold my kids, I'd rock my kids, but they would never naturally do that. So it's interesting,
Right.
like you said, is that there's something healing. Not that men can't have nurture, because we do. We offer
Oh, we
nurture and
totally
comfort
do.
100%. But there is something different about that coming. I think it's more powerful. I think there's a more natural energy to it that's
And
feminine.
yeah, and I think this sounds, I'm actually really grateful for the generations of men that are coming, because I feel like we're kind of like, we're making it more okay. Like I kind of appreciate like the Gen Z and these younger generations, because they're learning how to be more empathetic, and it's really beautiful because growing up in our eras, that was, if you were soft, and I'm going to use that word, or tender, you were ostracized.
Oh yeah, big time.
And it's interesting because I remember a long time ago, I heard Brene Brown talk on a podcast for a long time ago, and this was years ago. And they were asking her about working with like Navy SEALs, and she goes, "You know what? The greatest gift is to be tough and tender,
Mm-hmm.
and know that those two things can coexist." It's so fascinating because my oldest son practices jiu-jitsu, and it's so interesting because it is a lethal sport.
Oh yeah, big time.
But what I've learned watching him with his coaches is that it's not about hurting someone else. It's simply neutralizing and subduing an aggressive force.
Hmm.
And it's so funny because when I think about, guys, the partners that don't want to change, I tell plenty of women, I was like, you do the work, strong boundaries, and do not bring yourself down to his level.
Right. Yeah. Don't shame. Don't criticize. Don't go down that level.
But go, hey,
Right.
this is a non-negotiable, I mean, my wife did that for me. Honestly, without those boundaries and the strength that it took for her to be like,
Mm,
hey, you need help. Oh, I now look back and go, oh my gosh,
yeah.
that took so much courage and strength. And I'm so grateful that she had that and didn't waver.
Yeah. So that's definitely a piece that I think there's a theme there that she was firm boundary, it was very clear and she didn't waver, but she kind of said, hey, you need help. And was very clear, not shaming, not criticizing, but very clear. And I think
N-
that's something that I've heard before too, that I think men, not always, but I think men can respond to that in a way that kind of that firm, but not shaming firm, but firm, clear, you know, clear
And
minded, direct.
and as hard as it is, it needs to be done with love.
Yeah, yes, because what those guys need is love. Like those guys are actually seeking for authentic love and connection and to feel safe, seen, secure. And there's a lot of fear.
Oh,
And I think my positive is it's funny, do all the work I've done through Polyvagal Institute over the past 2 years. I think a lot of guys they're really stuck. Those kind of guys, they're stuck in a survival state. They're stuck in fight,
oh
flight,
yeah,
freeze, right? And so
100%.
because of that, I can't be because vulnerability is a threat, right? So of course I'm gonna get defensive. That's
Yeah,
fight. That's my sympathetic energy. This is a threat. I got to fight my way out of this,
yeah,
or I got to disconnect and run away. I got to numb out. I got to go drink. I got to just kind of totally zone out, which is your dorsal ventral, the vagus nerve, which is kind of a immobilization, disconnection, disassociation. It's like being
yeah,
a possum, right? Play dead until the threat goes away, and then come back alive again until there's a conflict or a threat, and then I go back into my cycle of fight, flight, freeze, shutdown, right?
oh yeah.
And so it again, and I see this on social media, unfortunately, and there's a lot of like, we just need men to feel. I'm like, I get it. Yeah, we do need men to feel, but telling them to feel is not going to get them to feel. If anything, telling them to feel, especially those kind of men, it's just going to activate their defense mechanisms. And I get why they're upset, but that's not going to help a guy. That's just going to ostracize them more. We don't shame
No.
them. It's like it takes, and the problem with this is not a light. I think there's some expectation that it's a light switch. You know,
Yeah,
you can't
yeah.
just turn it on. This is going to be a journey. This is going to be a journey for that guy and for the family and for you as the partner because he's got to undo and unpack his whole story and his narrative and his shame and his core fear, which, go back to the primal question, like the fear that question is a no, I'm not enough. I'm not loved. I'm not secure. I'm not
Well,
successful. I don't have a purpose. It's like, that is like death, right? So why if you think about why in the hell would I ever come close to that? I'm not.
exactly.
I'm gonna keep fighting. And so it's gonna take a lot of love, a lot of, you know, firm, kind but firm,
Oh yeah.
firmness, love. And that's hard work. So I feel
Oh,
for those partners. Like that's not easy work at all.
it's not. And it's interesting because, I always when you start to heal and you're
Mm.
you're brave enough or you're and not brave enough, when you're broken enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
when you're broken enough, and this is what I always like to I think and I tell my clients, and it's part of like on my website, I said, you were already good.
Mm.
We're just going to build you back better. And for some people, it's like I always, and you and I both grew up in a faith system where
Yeah.
you were taught like you're not good, you're not good, you're not good. And I think those messages, had good intentions.
Yeah.
Just sometimes the execution. and the
Yeah.
delivery didn't hit us in really good ways. So, when we care a lot, we carry that along in certain
Hmm.
places. I think it's important. Like I always, because I've heard I've heard a lot of the stories, and it's like, I'm all messed up. I can't, I'm like, no, you're good. We just got to get you a little bit better than you are. Because
Hmm.
I think too, because we live in a very fast paced culture and we want to hack everything. We want to hack healing. We want to
Yeah. That's not going to
hack our
happen here.
time.
No.
I think the hardest part, and this is something I've worked with some of my clients, I said, the hardest part is the slow journey back to you. I said,
Hmm.
in this journey back to you is going to be long. It's going to feel slow and it's going to feel
Hmm.
lonely, and I said, but the one thing, if the only thing I can do is to get you to move from like neck down to your heart, I said, and we can return to your home, that
Mm.
home that you were born with, that you're carrying every day, and you're being told that it's not good enough or it's not whatever. It's like, it's that holistic, it's that coming back to that heart center question, that primal question.
Right.
That's Then the work is there. Then
Yeah.
that is where you're healing. I said, and you might not feel it, in a week, 2 weeks, a month, a year. And I
Right.
can honestly say my return home to my heart space, it's a practice you have to do every day.
Hmm.
I I get disconnected just like everyone else, but there was that joy of coming back to you and who you really are is like the true wealth
Yeah.
of life. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. I agree. And I
And
love what you
you
said. I love that you said that, Sam. And I think, that journey home, of the head to the heart, because it is, I think a lot of guys are, um, and generally speaking here, that are stuck in their head and stuck
100%.
disconnected from the place that we all begin with as children, is kind of very much in our heart, right? Very
Yeah.
much in our body. And then we get told, or things are along the way, messages, whatever, whether it's implicit, and sometimes it's very explicit, like
Oh yeah.
very much so, that there is a disconnection as a means of survival. And so, in a way, to survive, it moves to the head in a disconnection, because to be here is not safe. And so, I love that journey home, kind of head down, connecting in. Not that we don't want to negate the head, we need that, but it's the integration of the mind and the body and the soul. It's coming back. So
And
beautifully said.
it's the intentionality to return to the wholeness that we were born with, that was
Yes.
separated,
Yeah.
because we all know that there's always those points where we learned it wasn't safe to be home in our body.
Hmm.
And you can label it however you want, but the real thing is, and when you return home, if you're ever just alone, you're never lonely.
Hmm. Nope. No. Because you know who you are, and you can answer that primal question is, I am, not
Yeah.
am I. It's no, I am. And you know that deep in your
Oh,
core. And so when you can't answer that, I am, enables you freedom and your capacity to give your gift away to those around you, to yourself. And then there's no striving. It's not anxious. It is lifelong work, though. I think to some degree you're always practicing awareness, and, where am I? I do it
oh yeah.
to this day. Like, hey, I got stuck. Okay, come back. But it's like it's smaller corrections now, small course corrections, versus like, well, I'm way off there. It's like, no, it's like you just kind of bring it back to center, bring it back to center. Um, and as we wrap up, I'm conscious of the time, hour and a half in, this will be good. So if you're with us, if you're still listening, I don't know what to do, comment, whatever, like it, share the episode. Cause there's so much more that we can talk about this, but I think we need a part two. We can go super deep into the 7 primal questions,
Oh
but,
yeah.
um, any closing thoughts for tonight, or definitely share where we can find you. If people want to do coaching with you,
Yeah.
please share that. But
So you can find me at sampowerscoaching.com.
cool.
I have a landing page. You can reach out through there. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok at Swami Powers. And it's a play on my name, and it's also
It's
one of my
important.
favorite. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a surf spot in San
Oh,
Diego. It's one of
yeah,
my
yeah.
favorite surf spots.
Swamis.
Ironically, the self-realization fellowship is right there. That's why they call it Swamis.
Oh, yeah.
And then you can see me probably more over on my wife's Instagram at Chrissy J Powers, because
Mm-hmm.
I pop on there. And it's what I always like to say is like, I'm not gonna change your life, because really only you can change your life. I will
Mm.
just provide the tools and some of the steps and the guardrails.
Yeah.
I mean, to just build a better you,
Yeah.
because you are good,
Mm-hmm.
and your past will not, it cannot define the success of your future.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that I think that a lot of men, a lot of people, and I was guilty of this too. There were points where my past, I was letting that define how I moved forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say that healing is possible for everyone.
Yeah.
And you're worthy of being loved and loving
Yeah.
yourself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Because the world needs that. The world needs you to be you.
Oh,
That's the gift that I can't give.
no.
Sam can't give. Only you can give that gift. That's uniquely you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I say it to all the clients I work with is like, no, the beautiful thing is that the world needs you to be you, and the world
Mm,
needs you to be whole and holistic and
yeah.
integrated, so you can give that gift away in a way that's actually benefiting you and the world,
Yeah.
in a very healthy way. And so, I know people don't always believe that when they hear that because they're stuck in their own scramble, they're stuck in their own fear. I get that,
Yeah.
but I say it anyway. Like I know I tell you're probably not going to believe what I'm going to tell you, but I would say it right now, and
Yeah.
I'm going to keep reminding you this as we work
Yeah.
together, because eventually it's going to click, and eventually that light bulb's going to go on. You're going to get it. Yeah. So as we close out, any final, one word of encouragement? Is it just that, hey, just anything at all besides
I
finding
can just
those?
say, when you can learn to love yourself authentically, holistically, you can change the world that you live in and the
Hmm.
world that is around you.
Love it.
And really, you don't need to save the world, but if you can change your world, the world will heal.
Love it. One final random question that I don't know why I haven't been doing this since I've been interviewing people, but I'm gonna
Okay.
implement this now moving forward.
Okay.
It just because I think I would totally relate to your vibe, punk rock 90s, like that's me,
Yeah.
because that was what I grew
Yeah.
in. So I'm gonna start adding this in to everyone I ask. And again, why I haven't done this, maybe I was being too serious before.
It's
But it's like, hey, what record are you listening to right now? Like what are you playing?
oh
Like what
gosh.
is like the record you're listening to right now?
Okay, so I'm a musical misfit, which is really so my. I'll just give you a snapshot. So I'm listening to Mazzy Star.
Okay.
I'm back on a little Mazzy Star kick, because all those sad, beautiful days, like in those early days of like being a teen and just hearing Hope Sandoval's voice, just there's something beautiful of it. I'm listening to La Loma, which is like an instrumental
Okay.
Cuban band.
Okay.
Um, I'm also listening to the Veveteer band,
Okay.
which is Up on High. And then today we finished off with Black Sabbath.
Nice.
And a little bit of Misfits.
Okay.
I was playing the Misfits for my 11-year-old, and I was like, dude, this is really good. And he's like, okay, Dad, that's I was like, dude, this like changed my life.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love the eclectic,
Oh
the
yeah.
kind, yeah. There's a nice little spectrum here you're hitting, and I love
Oh
that.
yeah.
And I feel like I need to ask that more, because you get so much insight into someone's life right there when you hear what music they're
So
listening to,
so let me
you know?
turn this on you. What are you listening to right now?
Oh gosh. Well, right now, I have the new, this is gonna be weird, but the newest Sufjan Stevens album,
Oh,
Javelin, just came out.
so
So
good. Oh my
I have
gosh.
the record of that. And I record player. My kids love the record player,
Oh, so cool.
because they feel it. They don't like
Oh, it's the
the digital as much, so they're into it. And then they love. I recently just got to see the 20th year anniversary of Postal Service and Death Cab for Cutie when they did
oh,
the record Transatlanticism straight, and then the whole Postal Service record straight through that at the Hollywood Bowl. And so been spinning Postal Service lately record,
So
and my
good,
kids
right?
love that. They love dancing. We love doing dance parties, and that was an amazing show, by the way.
Happy music, right?
An
Like
amazing show.
exciting.
I mean,
Exciting.
transatlanticism is not as happy. I mean, the lyrics aren't that happy, but
No.
you get your body into it. Postal Service was great. Like, I've seen Death Cab numerous times, but the Postal Service stuff, I've actually never seen that live. So that was an amazing experience at the bowl. So definitely Postal Service, the new Sufjan record. I think those are the big ones I've just been spinning lately, just the past like couple weeks.
If
heavily.
you like Postal Service, have you heard Yoke Lore?
The name sounds super familiar. Yeah, Yoke Lore. Let me just look at
The
it.
album is Towards a Never Ending New Beginning. I just found them.
Yoke Lore.
And they kind of have a little bit of that dance vibe. They've got a little bit of that indie vibe. And it's funny because that could be a whole podcast about just talking about music, because music's like breathing.
Yeah. We should do another we should do an episode on that. I would totally do a music one. That'd be fun.
Oh, that would be hilarious. And I mean, I'm listening to like Zambian psychedelic rock from the 70s. And I listen to really eclectic music because I played music for a long time. And so I think that when you play music you get hungry to know. That's the whole stay curious, be curious, learn.
Oh yeah, no, totally. No, I agree with you. It's a thing. I listened to the Beatles song. That was fun. The new Beatles song. That was totally fun. I was like, oh, this is like totally the Beatles. Like, it's like crazy. It's like, oh, this is the Beatles.
Wild.
Like, it's
wild,
like
right?
Crazy how they record. I'm like, oh, this is totally the Beatles. This is nuts. So that was fun. My dad was stoked on that. He was, because he saw them grow, when they were touring, I'm like, that was his era, seeing them live when they were touring, and I know they still tour, but when they were like in their prime.
Oh, the heyday of like
the
hysteria.
Heyday. Yeah.
Beatlemania,
like,
baby.
Yeah, that was it. They saw that. And so that was his era, and, Hendrix and all those things. So that's when, Led Zeppelin and all that kind of stuff. Like, obviously I was later, but that was their heyday when they were doing it. But thank you for sharing that. And I'm now going to start asking all my guests what are they currently listening to, because I think that's fun.
That would be very fascinating.
And I missed out on some really big authors, and I'm like, that would have been cool to ask them. Like, what did they listen to? Like,
I know. I think that's something too that I always find interesting is the creative act.
Yeah.
And what inspires someone, behind, what do they use to help that frame of mind, that flow state? And I love finding out, because I'm like, I want to know.
Yeah,
why not?
I want to know too. And I feel like I've missed out on so much information from not asking that question. So you're the first, and we're a new trajectory for the podcast.
Because you're going to, let's not look back and regret. Let's look forward and go, we're going to learn so many new things about these unique people. And that's a gift to the world.
That's my new thing. Well, thank you. Thank you, Sam. I mean, gosh, we could probably talk for 10 more hours, but I think people would be like, let's turn this off now. Because it's an hour and 40. So, dude, have a great night, and that everyone sleeps over there in the Powers house.
Yes.
And same here, but we'll have you on much sooner. It won't be 3 years before round 2.
Perfect. I'm up for it.
It might be 3 weeks. Maybe we'll speed this up a bit, but
right on.
So thank you, Sam.
Oh, thank you, Travis. I appreciate it.
See you, dude.